Today we're going to be looking at how to make clear spoons. Once you get good at these things, you can make them in pretty rapid succession. The ones that I'm making today are going to be used for sandblasting later on down the line. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab my color rod and clean up the edge, clean up that cut scuzz. This is Galaxy, but you can use whatever color you want. Now the only thing we're using this color for is to put dots on the side, just for a little bit of added color. Now I'm going to grab my tube. This tube that I'm using is 26 by 4 millimeter, but you can play around with different sizes and see which size suits you the best. But I'm basically heating up just the very bottom there to create a round bottom. I'm going to wipe off that uneven part once I heat it up evenly, and it's going to make a more consistent curve. And now that I've got that evened up, I'm gonna go ahead and start to condense it down, back it back up, because when I pulled it a little thin, so I want it to be the same even wall weight as the rest of the tube. Once I get it to about where I want it, I'm gonna switch from this neutral stance and go to an angled position and start to work on the back, more towards the back and the shoulder. I'm trying to heat up more and more of this tube. You can see by my angle on the bottom right corner that I'm slowly backing it up. I'm not doing it too aggressive or going full tilt or anything, but it is slightly tilted to where it'll start to back up on itself, and you'll see I'll modulate that by my position. Once I got a good enough gather going there, a glob, I'm gonna pull it out of the flame, wait a second for it to grow a little bit of a skin because it's too molten to blow into it first, and then I'm gonna slowly start puffing until I get that bubble shape. Once I've got the bubble shape, I'm going to go back into the flame and kind of heat it up again one more time, see how it's moving. That's how I gauge the thickness and if everything's even and consistent. I'm not really blowing into it at all right now. I'm just making sure that everything's nice. Now I'm going to grab a punty. I'm just using 7 millimeter rod here, but you can use tubing or rod, whatever you feel most comfortable with. I'm going to heat it up and do a cold seal by heating up the rod more than the piece itself. Tag it to the front, and now I'm going to go directly into this stretch for the stem. So at first I'm heating up basically where I left off when I was creating the bowl head, and I'm going to start working down towards my blow tube. And I'm getting this all nice and consistently hot, so when I stretch it, everything stretches evenly. I'm slowly pulling apart during this step here, but not anything drastic at all, just very, very slowly. So I can gauge where it's pulling, heat up a little bit more if it's too thick in one area, as you see here, and continue stretching. For these, the customer has a elongated logo, so I need to make these stems a little bit longer than I normally would, but you can basically stretch it whatever size you want. I would caution against doing too small of a stretch though, because you don't want it to be too close to the person's face. Now I'm just stretching out the mouthpiece. I never use my attachment where I've sealed onto the blow tube as the mouthpiece. I usually leave a little bit of extra room for me to shape it properly, because you can see the difference. Now that I've got the basic shape that I want, I don't need that punty handle anymore, so I'm going to rip it off and clean off the little glass shard that I left behind. Go right back into my bottom flame and then reshape this bowl just a little bit. Now what I'm doing here is known commonly as back flaming. I'm kind of making sure that this mouthpiece doesn't get too cold on me while I'm working the rest of the parts. For these spoons, since they're so simple and they're just mainly clear, I don't anneal them immediately. I'll bench cool them and then anneal them in a kiln later on. And with bench cooling, you need to make sure that the piece stays evenly heated. Now I've picked a spot where I'm gonna pop my hole, and I'm kind of going between getting it directly in the flame and then putting it just below the flame and letting it just tickle the flame so I can get a smaller hole. I found in my case that it's much easier to fix a hole that's too small than it is to fix one that's too big. So now I've heated just around the hole and I'm gonna press in there. I only puff at this point if I need to, if I see the rim is getting off shape, misshapen or off centered. Now I always go back in and clear off those little marks that the graphite leaves. It leaves like little waves. And as I'm doing this, I'm also basically heating up the whole bowl pack too, to where if I need to grab it with my reamer like I'm about to do here and kind of make sure it's centered, I can do that. Now if you do this, I would caution that you need to let the reamer rest in the hole for a second before you start moving, because it's going to cool down that hole so it stops you from misshaping it. After I am happy with the bowl pack, I'll go ahead and just heat up directly underneath of it and do that smash there, just a tiny smash. It doesn't need to be nothing too big. If you do this too big, you can get the hole of the bowl pack on the inside too close to the bottom, and that creates problems for the user later on down the line. Now I'm going to go right into heating up my rod, and I'm going to place just 3 really quick dots. I found that if you're adding multiple dots in the same small area, you don't have to do one at a time because you can melt them all in together pretty easily. So now I'm just making sure there's no rough edges or 90-degree angles or any striations or anything like that going through. And you can see there that it starts to round up and become part of the glass. And now I've picked the opposite side and I started heating it up, and I'm gonna plug that bowl pack hole and I'm gonna start blowing to blow out the carb. On these I'm doing an extended carb, but you can just, really you could be done at this point if you just pop this hole and call it a day. But I just like to put a little bit of extra glass on there. So I'm gonna grab a clear rod, same size as the one I used for my punty earlier, 7mm. And I'm gonna heat up a small portion of it, and then I'm gonna place it directly on top of that hole, heat that up, and then blow out an extended carb. Just like that. And I found that if you keep going in and trying to shape this, it starts to sink into the bowl and it looks a little weird. So I try to do this in one move, and then I can just ream it open from there and kind of push it around if I need to. And there it is, less than 10 minutes. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go in and back flame it really good one last time to make sure everything's the same consistent temperature before I cut it off and place it in my cold kiln to batch anneal at a later date. You see here I'm kind of using a bushy flame, and I'm not putting it in the glass. I'm not putting the glass into the flame as if I was trying to melt it. I'm just keeping it hot. I'm gonna warm up my claw grabbers just a little bit there and grab onto it and go in on the mouthpiece and cut it off. Now what I like to do for mouthpieces is I'll pull a little cone like that. You saw I heated it up evenly. I pulled the cone, then I melted back onto the cone, and I'm just gonna snap it. And 9 times out of 10, you're gonna get a perfectly sized hole, as you see. And it's it doesn't create any glass dust. all the dust is stuck inside of that punty that I used to snap off essentially. So I don't run the risk of having little glass shards inside of my stem that could melt onto it, and then basically I'd have a rough time trying to clean that up. I'm gonna warm up my tweezers a little bit, pull it off the claw grabbers, and stick it inside the kiln. And that's basically it. I've added a second time of me doing it just to show you guys again. That's going to do it for this one. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.